Gold, frankincense and myrrh. A special edition for Christmas, dedicated to Rory in Philadelphia, whose family supports us on Patreon. Hello, this is Jana, and I'm here to introduce a special Christmas edition of Herodotus with Bertie. Hey Bertie, I've been listening to your Herodotus stories, and I've got the idea that he was writing about the world long before Christ was born. So I'm a little puzzled. What has Herodotus got to do with Christmas?
You're right, he lived about 400 years before Christ, and some of the events he's writing about happened even earlier. But he is writing about the Middle East, where Jesus was born, and specifically, he can tell us about some very Christmassy gifts: gold, frankincense and myrrh, which you've probably heard of from the Christmas story. Or maybe you've seen them on Christmas cards, showing the three wise men kneeling before the baby Jesus in the stable, offering these mysterious gifts of the East.
But actually, in the Bible, Matthew writes that the magi followed a star to a house in Bethlehem. The stable and the manger scene is in a different gospel written by Luke.
Oh, right. Interesting. But that scene's not quite so good on a Christmas card.
So who do you think the wise men or the magi were? The Bible calls the wise men magi and says they came from the east, following a star. It doesn't say how many there were, by the way. The tradition of three wise men grew up later. Who do you think they were?
The Magi were probably priests in the Persian religion Zoroastrianism. If you've been listening to Herodotus, you will have a good idea who the ancient Persians were, and also you might know that we get the word magic from magi.
Okay, so on to gifts. Gold comes from many places. If you are lucky, you can find it in Africa, America, Australia, India. What does Herodotus say about it?
He mentions Ethiopia as being very rich in gold, and he also has a really curious story about gold from India. Herodotus didn't visit India, but he heard about it from the Persians, who had conquered part of India in the time of King Darius. That's how he picked up a story about gold-digging ants. These ants were somewhat bigger than the usual ants that you find in your garden. They were about the size of a fox, and they were furry. They lived in the desert where sand and gold dust were all mixed up, and they sorted it out somehow, sifting the gold dust out of the sand. And the local people collected the gold from the burrows where the ants lived.
That doesn't sound true to me. Gold-digging ants the size of foxes? Come on.
Well, Herodotus didn't get everything right, but some people think he was talking about a furry creature called a marmot that lives in Pakistan.
It still sounds unlikely. What else does he say about India?
He says that some people from India are vegetarians.
Well, at least he's got that right, because that's certainly true.
And he also says that some people in India eat their parents when they die.
That is horrifying. I definitely don't believe that.
Well, I'm not sure I do either, but CNN, the cable news company, claims to have met some people in northern India called Agori who eat human brains.
Oh, it's okay if it's on CNN, then it must be true.
Anyway, one reason to study ancient history is to develop your sense of what is true and what isn't. Not everything that's in history or in the news is actually true. You have to learn to decide for yourself what's true and what's false.
Okay, so what tall stories does Herodotus give us about frankincense and myrrh?
Herodotus tells us they came from Arabia. In fact, he says that most rich and wonderful things come from the extreme north or the extreme south of the world, or at least the world that he knew about. As for Greece, which he saw as the centre of the known world, he says they have nice weather, but not much in the way of precious things.
I think I might be able to tell you a little bit about frankincense and myrrh.
But first, we've got a fantastic sponsor to tell you about, Storyworth. You might recall that I've given Storyworth as a present to my son Sasha, who turned 11 in November.
Yes, I do recall. But just in case people didn't hear that episode, I'll just explain what Storyworth is. Storyworth is an online service that helps you and your loved ones preserve precious memories and stories for years to come. Every week, Storyworth emails your relative or friend a thought-provoking question of your choice. After 1 year, Storyworth will compile all your loved ones' stories, including photos, into a beautiful keepsake book that you'll be able to share and revisit for generations to come. So, has it got Sasha writing?
It certainly has. I sent him a question asking what he thinks of school, and this is what I learned. He loves his history lessons on Greek mythology.
Oh, that's hardly surprising. I bet he got his love of Greek myths from his dad.
Well, actually, he got it from reading Percy Jackson. But anyway, he also wrote that he didn't enjoy his science lessons about waves because, as he wrote, we spent hours banging drums till our ears hurt. Those would be sound waves, I suppose. And finally he wrote, overall, I suppose my school's not the worst, but it could be better if the teachers understood children's jokes and smiled a bit more. Anyway, I hope his kids will smile when they read his Storyworth book in years to come.
Storyworth is a great present for all your family and people you love. Grandparents are a whole store of stories, so it's a brilliant present for them. And it's a great way to communicate with loved ones if you are away from them.
Yes, with Storyworth, I'm giving those I love most a thoughtful, personal gift from the heart and preserving their memories and stories for years to come. Go to storyworth.com/storynori and save $10 on your first purchase. That's storyworth.com/storynori to save $10 on your first purchase.
Right, so just to prove that I do listen to your Herodotus histories, here's what we've heard already about frankincense and myrrh. Cambyses, the Persian king who conquered Egypt, sent them as gifts to the king of Ethiopia.
That's right. It's great to have at least one listener. So thanks, Jana. Jana, I know that you are interested in frankincense and myrrh, so perhaps you can tell us a little bit about them.
Frankincense is a resin, or a thick, gooey gum that comes out of the bark of some trees in the Middle East. And chiefly, it smells nice, so it's often used in incense and perfume. Is this what Herodotus tells us?
Pretty much, and he says that it comes from Arabia. He also mentions that the trees that make frankincense are guarded by winged snakes.
I knew it! There had to be at least one tall story.
Well, maybe he means locusts or possibly mosquitoes.
Okay, so myrrh is also a kind of resin or gum from the Middle East. It smells lovely. It's also antiseptic and can be put on minor cuts. Some people use it as a mouthwash or toothpaste. And it's in some ancient remedies for colds. Very useful.
Yes, myrrh has been a special gift for many thousands of years.
So there we have it. Gold from giant Indian ants and frankincense and myrrh from Arabian trees.
Guarded by winged snakes.
We hope you've enjoyed this Christmassy version of Herodotus. And we are delighted to dedicate this story to Rory, aged 8, from Philadelphia, whose family kindly support us on Patreon.
That's a great name. Rory rhymes with Storynori.
Oh, it certainly does. His mum, Anna, writes that he enjoys listening to Storynori in the car and in the bath.
Fantastic. Both great places to listen to podcasts, I should know, and especially to listen to Storynori.
From me, Jana.
And from me, Bertie.
Merry Christmas!